In the 101st year after the conquest, 1,000 lords and their retinues rode for Harrenhal, because it was the largest castle in the realm and the only one with hall enough to hold them all, and because the king had summoned them there to decide who would rule after he was gone. Jaehaerys Targaryen had fathered 13 children on his sister queen, and by that year he could not name a single one of them to follow him. He was 67 years old, and he had reigned for 53 of those years, longer than any Targaryen before him or since. And in all that time he had laid roads where there had been mud, written law where there had been custom, and kept a peace so long that his subjects had forgotten what the alternative looked like. The lords who rode to Harrenhal came to settle the one thing he had never managed to settle himself. 13 days of argument in that hall would produce a decision, and that decision would hold for 28 years before it came apart and took most of the dragons in the world down with it. But that is the end of the story. And to understand how a man who did almost everything right arrived at it, we have to go back more than 40 years, to a summer when the realm was still golden, and to a queen who flew north to see where the world ended. Life went on, because it always does. In the 57th year, the gods gave Jaehaerys and Alicent a second son, whom they named Balon, and he came into the world louder and lustier than his brother Aemon before him. And because the white ravens had flown from the citadel only 2 days earlier, the court dubbed him the Spring Prince. The following year, the queen went north on Silverwing, and her first sight of the wall from the air took her breath away. Lord Commander Lothar Burleigh assembled 800 of his finest men at Castle Black to receive her, and they feasted her that night on mammoth meat washed down with mead and stout. He began apologizing for it. They did what they could, he said, but the beds were hard and the halls were cold and the food is nourishing, the queen finished for him, and that is all that I require. It will please me to eat as you do. At dawn, they took her to the top of the ice, where the Lord Commander gestured out at the endless dark green of the haunted forest. Here the world ends, he told her. It was Silverwing, though, who told the queen something that no maester in the Seven Kingdoms could have. It was high summer and the wall was weeping, and yet every gust of wind off the ice made the dragon hiss and snap. And when Alicent wrote to her husband about it afterward, she chose her words with great care. Thrice I flew Silverwing high above Castle Black, and thrice I tried to take her north beyond the wall, but every time she veered back south again and refused to go. Never before has she refused to take me where I wished to go. I laughed about it when I came down again, so the Black brothers would not realize anything was amiss. But it troubled me then, and it troubles me still. She rode the top of the wall westward as far as the Night Fort, and found that place grim beyond her power to describe. It is so huge the men seem dwarfed by it, like mice in a ruined hall, and there is a darkness there, a taste in the air. I was so glad to leave that place. She had not come north as a traveler taking in the sights, and she spent her afternoons with the officers of the watch learning what they lacked, which turned out to be land, and men, and food enough to survive a winter. Her answer was a further grant of land south of the wall to keep the brothers fed, and the realm remembers it still as the new gift. She had not flown north to look at ice. Above all else, Alicent Targaryen liked to say, a queen must know how to listen. And at Castle Black, she spent her afternoons listening to the officers of the watch explain what they lacked, which turned out to be land and men and food enough to survive a winter. She had an answer ready for each of them. The Night Fort was crumbling and overlarge and ruinous to heat, she told the Lord Commander, so the brothers should abandon it and raise a smaller castle further east. And when he replied that the watch had no coin for building castles, she told him that she would pay for it herself and pledged her jewels against the cost. I have a good many jewels, she said. It took 8 years to build, and it was called Deep Lake, and a statue of her stands outside its hall to this day. She wanted to hear from the women of the north as well, And when Lord Burleigh explained that there were no women on the wall, she kept asking until he gave in and had her escorted to a village the Black brothers called Molestown, warning her on the way that most of the women she would find there had nothing left to sell but themselves. The queen told him she did not care, and so she held her women's court among them. And there she heard something that would change the 7 kingdoms. There was a girl in that village no older than the queen herself, married at 14 to a boy she was fond of. And their lord had come down on the wedding with his men-at-arms to claim a right that the law still granted him. Her husband could not raise a hand against a lord without forfeiting his life, so he raised it against her instead. And from that day forward, he never called her anything but whore, until at last the girl decided that if that was to be her name, she would live by it, and walked to Molestown to do it. Hers was the worst of the stories the queen heard that afternoon, and it was far from the only one. At White Harbor, at Barrowton, in Molestown itself, woman after woman spoke of her own wedding night, and the queen sat and listened to every one of them. She had known the custom existed. Every Targaryen knew it, because men of her own house had made free with the wives of fisherfolk and serving men for a century, and the children who came of it were called dragon seeds and given gifts. What she had never understood, she said afterward, was that it was still happening, in her realm, under her husband's peace, while she closed her eyes to it. Back in King's Landing, she put it to the small council, and the council did not want to hear it. What she proposed would be difficult, the king told her, because lords grew troublesome when kings began taking away things the lords regarded as their own, their lands, their gold, their rights. Their wives, the queen finished for him. She reminded him of their own wedding and asked him what he would have done if he had been a blacksmith and she a washerwoman, and some lord had come to claim her on the day they said their vows. Killed him, Jaehaerys said, but I am not a blacksmith. That was the whole of her argument, and she pressed it. A blacksmith was still a man, she said, and no man but a coward would stand aside while another took his wife, and surely the throne did not want blacksmiths killing lords. Then she turned to Grand Maester Bennifer and asked him how many lords had already died that way, and Bennifer allowed that it was more than he cared to say, and that such deaths were seldom spoken of for fear other men would take the idea. The king tried the argument that the right of the first night was ancient, as much a part of lordship as the right of pit and gallows, and that some of his more truculent subjects would be loath to surrender it. Sometimes, he said, it was best to let a sleeping dragon lie. We are the sleeping dragons, the queen threw back at him. These lords who love their first nights are dogs. His justiciar tried to defend the custom as something older than the Andals and older than the faith, a warlord's blessing bestowed on a bride so that her husband might raise a hero's son as his own. And the queen answered that she had listened to the women these heroes had blessed, and that none of them had felt blessed. Old men, fat men, cruel men, men who had not washed in half a year. She had the whole list, and she gave it to the council one item at a time. It was Septon Barth who ended it, by telling the king plainly that the queen had the right of this, that the first men had fought with bronze and fed their trees with blood and were not the men sitting in that room, and that every knight in the realm swore to protect the innocence of maidens, except, apparently, when his own lord wished otherwise. Jaehaerys threw up his hands. I know when I am beaten, he said. Very well, let it be done. And so the second of what the small folk came to call Queen Alysanne's laws was written into the peace of the realm, and a bride's wedding night belonged to her husband and to nobody else.
and any man who thought otherwise, lord or peasant, would answer for it as a criminal. That was the height of it, and that was the golden age at its brightest.
On the 7th day of the 59th year, a battered ship came limping up the Whispering Sound into Old Town, her sails patched and salt-stained, and her banner so bleached by the sun that nobody could read it, and she was not recognized until she was tied up at the dock. She was the Lady Meredith, and she had sailed west out of that same harbor almost 3 years earlier in company with a Braavosi ship called the Sun Chaser. 9 of every 10 men who came ashore off her were summer islanders, hired in Sothorios at ruinous wages to replace the men she had lost. Sir Eustace Hightower came off last, gaunt and burnt dark and lined in a way he had not been when he left, and when the dockman asked whether he had crossed the Sunset Sea, he told them that his holds were full of rich cargo from Sothorios and nothing else. "That was a dream," he said. The first 12 days had been the finest sailing of his life, he told his grandsire's hall. Then the wind died for a fortnight, and when it came back, the sky had turned the color of blood, and the ocean rose. 3 storms came, each worse than the last, and lightning split the mast of his brother's ship from the crow's nest to the deck, and then a wave rose up and swallowed her whole while he watched. His crew swore to the end of their lives that they had seen a kraken take her. The next morning the sea was blue and innocent again, and a sail appeared on the horizon, and it was the Sun Chaser come back to find them. Alyssa Farman had not only survived the storm, she had been driven west by it and found land. 3 small islands on no chart in the world, a mountain attended by 2 hills, as she described them, and she named them Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. Eustace Hightower wanted to stop there. They had spices no man had tasted, and fruits nobody could name, and that was discovery enough for one lifetime. Alyssa told him 3 islands were nothing, and that another Essos might lie just beyond the horizon, and he answered that another 1,000 leagues of empty ocean might lie there instead, and no amount of arguing moved him. So the Lady Meredith turned east for home, and the Sun Chaser went on west, chasing the sun, and she was never seen again in any port of Westeros. Except that decades later a Velaryon boy named Corlys, 6 years old and dreaming of the sea in that same year, would grow up to sail farther than any man of Westeros ever had, and on his second voyage he reached Ashai by the Shadow at the eastern edge of the world. And in that black harbor, as far from Old Town as a ship can get, he saw an old and much weathered vessel that he would swear to his dying day could only have been the Sun Chaser. In the 61st year, an old friend and old adversary rode up from Storm's End to deliver 3 young girls to court. 2 were the orphaned daughters of Rogar Baratheon's brother, and the third was Lady Jocelyn, his own daughter by Queen Alyssa, the small, frail babe born in the year of the stranger, grown now into a tall, solemn girl of 7 with large dark eyes and hair black as sin. 9 years later she would marry the king's heir. Rogar's own hair had gone gray. His face was pale and lined, and he had grown so gaunt that his clothes hung loose on him as though they had been cut for a larger man. And when he took a knee before the Iron Throne, he could not rise from it again without a king's guard's arm to lean on. He had come to ask a boon, he said. Jocelyn had never known a mother. His brother's wives had done what they could, and both of them were dead now. And he asked that she and her cousins be taken as wards and raised at court beside the king's own children. "Jocelyn is our own sister," Alysanne answered him. "We have not forgotten. Our blood." Then he asked them to look after his son as well when he was gone. That took the king aback, and he asked where his lordship meant to go. "Into the mountains," Rogar told him with a flash of his old ferocity. His maester said he was dying, and he believed him, and there was milk of the poppy for the pain, but he used only a little,
because he would not sleep away what was left. His own brother Boris had turned outlaw in the Red Mountains and thrown in with the man who called himself the Vulture King, and Rogar meant to settle both of them. When I die, I want to die with my axe in my hand, screaming a curse. Do I have your leave?" Jaehaerys came down off the throne to take him by the shoulder. "You have my leave, my lord. And more than that, you have my sword." The histories call what followed the Third Dornish War, though the small folk called it Lord Rogar's War, and that name fits better, because the Prince of Dorne kept his armies well clear of it. 500 Stormlanders climbed into the heights on foot, while the king rode Vermithor above them and burned out the raider camps one by one until there was nothing left to come back to. "He calls himself a vulture," Jaehaerys said, "but he does not fly. He hides." Boris Baratheon was cornered first, and as the brothers came face to face, the king landed between them and told his old hand that he would not have him named a kinslayer, because the traitor was his own. The man who called himself the Vulture King was taken a moon later in a lair the dragon had already burned, and when they brought him before Rogar in chains, Rogar had the chains struck off and a spear and shield put into his hands. "If he kills me, let him go free." Wasted and in pain as he was, Rogar turned the Dornishman aside almost contemptuously, and that was the end of it. When it was done, he only seemed tired. "It seems I will not die with axe in hand after all," he told the king. Nor did he. Rogar Baratheon died in his bed at Storm's End half a year later, with his maester and his septon and his brother and his son beside him. The war had lasted less than 6 months, and it had done something for Jaehaerys that no law and no road ever could. "Against the shivers I was helpless," he told Septon Barth. "Against the vulture, I was a king again." In the 62nd year, the king named his eldest son Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. Aemon was 7 years old, tall and modest, and he still trained every morning in the yard with his brother Balon, the two of them so evenly matched. Aemon taller and stronger, Balon quicker and fiercer, that serving men and washerwomen and stable boys would stop work to crowd the yard and cheer for one or the other. One of those who came to watch was Jocelyn Baratheon, and at the feast that followed the investiture, the queen sat her beside Aemon, and the two of them talked and laughed the whole evening as though nobody else were in the hall. That same winter, the king looked at a map and began the work he would be remembered for longest. "When the queen and I go forth on our progresses," he told the council, "we go on Vermithor and Silverwing, and from the clouds we see cities and castles, hills and swamps, old forests and battlefields and market towns. Do you know what I do not see?" He slapped the table. "Roads, my lords. I will have roads." There had always been roads in Westeros, and they were abysmal, narrow and rutted and crooked, washed out by any hard rain, with armed men holding the fords for coin and robber knights working the stretches between, so that even great lords traveled with an escort. The kingsroad came first, cut south through the Old Forest to Storm's End, and north from the Blackwater to the Trident, and on through the Neck, across the trackless north to Winterfell and the Wall. The Rose Road followed, and the Ocean Road, the River Road and the Gold Road, some of them remade out of ancient tracks, and some of them cut where nothing had ever run. The work went on for the rest of his reign and into his successors, and the words on his monument at the Citadel say it better than any chronicle. He bound the land together and made of 7 kingdoms one. The gods went on blessing them with children through all of it, and it would be hard to find 4 siblings less alike than the ones who came next.
Maegelle, born that same year, was gentle and exceedingly bright, and would give her life to the faith. Phaegon, a year later, was a quiet boy with wary eyes who preferred the library to the yard and whom half the court found frankly sour. Daella, a year after him, was delicate and shy and said nothing at all until she was nearly 2. Sarah came 3 years later, and the first word she spoke was no, and she said it often and loudly. She was tempestuous and disobedient, and she thrived on attention and sulked without it. And one night the queen whispered something to the king that she would have cause to remember. 7 save us. When I look at her, I see Aerea. The last of the 4 was Visera, born in the 71st year, and she had a will of her own as well, but she never screamed and she never cried. Sly was one word used for her, and vain was another, and every man at court agreed she was beautiful. When a stammering young squire told her she was a goddess, she agreed with him. Meanwhile, the eldest were growing up. The queen had briefly considered marrying Aemon to his sister Alyssa, and put the thought aside firmly, because Alyssa had been following Balon about since she could walk. Alyssa is for Balon, she said, and that was the end of it. So Aemon married Jocelyn Baratheon in the 70th year, in a ceremony that rivaled the Golden Wedding. She was 16 and an inch shy of 6 feet, black-haired and dark-eyed, and he was 15 and taller still. And when Sir Giles Morrigan saw the Dark Lady and the Pale Prince standing side by side, he said the obvious thing. There stands the future of the realm. 2 years later, Aemon won his spurs at a tourney at Duskendale, in part by hammering his own brother into submission, and claimed a dragon within the month. He took the blood-red Caraxes, fiercest of all the young dragons under the hill, whom the dragon keepers called the Bloodworm. Queen Alysanne took great pride in arranging marriages, and had made hundreds of them across the realm, and none of it prepared her for her own 4 youngest children. That search would torment her for years, set her against her daughters, drive her and the king apart, and bring her at one point to consider renouncing her marriage and spending the rest of her life with the Silent Sisters. It began with Vagon and Daella, a year apart in age and assumed from the cradle to be a match. "Be sweet to your little sister," the king told the prince when he was 5. "One day she will be your Alysanne." There was never any warmth in it. Vagon tolerated his sister's presence without ever seeking it. Daella was frightened of her sour, bookish brother, and each had a private verdict on the other. He thought her stupid, she thought him mean. When the queen raised it, the king said they were only children and would warm to one another in time. And they never did. It came apart in the 73rd year when one of the queen's companions, new to the Red Keep, teasingly asked the 2 of them when they would be married. Vagon was 10 and Daella was 9, and he answered in front of half the court. "I would never marry her. She can barely read. She should find some lord in need of stupid children, for that is the only sort he will ever have of her." Daella burst into tears and fled the hall with her mother running after her. And it fell to their sister Alyssa, 13 years old and 3 years his elder, to empty a flagon of wine over his head. Even that did not make him repent. "You are wasting arbor gold," he said, and went to change his clothes. The king's remedy was to hand the problem to Balon, who marched his brother into the yard and put a sword in his hand, and it did not set him right in the slightest. Vagon hated every hour of it. He was a miserable fighter, and he had a gift for making everyone around him miserable as well. Balon persisted a full year at his father's insistence before admitting the truth of it. The more the boy drilled, the worse he looked. It ended when Balon brought their sister Alyssa down to the yard in man's mail, and Alyssa had not forgotten the arbor gold. Laughing and shouting mockery,
she danced around her younger brother and humiliated him 100 times over while Daella watched from a window above, and Vagon threw down his sword and walked out of that yard and never came back to it. There were losses in those years that nobody planned for either. A son named Gaemon was born in the 73rd year and did not survive infancy, and another named Velaryon died a fortnight short of his first name day, and each time the queen asked herself what she had done wrong to deserve it. And there was one arrival that mattered more than anyone in that room understood at the time. In the 74th year, Jocelyn gave Prince Aemon a daughter, born on the 7th day of the 7th moon, which the Septons judged highly auspicious. Rhaenys was large and fierce, with her mother's black hair and her father's pale violet eyes, and as the firstborn child of the Prince of Dragonstone, many hailed her as next in line after him. When Queen Alysanne first took her in her arms, she called the girl our queen-to-be. As for Vagon, the answer came 5 years later, on his 15th name day, when his parents finally put the obvious question to Grand Maester Elessar and asked whether the boy might have the makings of a maester. No, Elessar said bluntly, and listed everything a maester must do that Vagon plainly never would. Teach a lord's children their sums, keep ravens, deliver a child. Then he offered them something better. The boy was no maester, but he might well have the makings of an archmaester, and he would either find himself in the Citadel's library or get lost among the books so thoroughly that nobody need worry about him again. 3 days later, the king called his son to his solar and told him he would be taking ship for Old Town in a fortnight, that the Citadel would take charge of him, and that what became of him from there was his own to determine. "Yes, father." "Good," the prince said in his usual manner. Afterward, Jaehaerys told the queen that he thought the boy had almost smiled.
With Vagon settled, the next in line was his sister Daella, and she was a different sort of problem entirely. "My little flower," the queen called her. She stood 5 feet 2 inches on her toes, and there was something childish about her that made everyone think her younger than she was. And where her mother had been fearless, Daella always seemed to be afraid. She had loved a kitten until it scratched her and would not go near a cat afterward. The dragons terrified her, Silverwing included. She loved flowers, but was frightened of gardens, because a bee had once come close. There was some truth in what her brother had said, and even her septa admitted it. She learned to read haltingly, and without much comprehension. She could not hold the simplest prayers in her memory, and she had a sweet voice but would not sing, because she always got the words wrong. The king despaired of her more openly than the queen did. She would not even speak to a boy, he said, so how was she to marry? And the faith would not take a girl who wept when asked to read aloud. Alysanne defended her every time, saying that Daella was sweet and kind and had a tender heart, and that not every Targaryen needed to wield a sword and ride a dragon. Her mother tried for 3 years. At 13, the princess was sent to Driftmark to meet Corlys Velaryon, 10 years her elder and already a celebrated captain, and she was seasick crossing the bay and came home with a verdict that was entirely correct. "He likes his boats better than he likes me." At 14, she kept company with 4 promising squires her own age until one pressed wine on her and another kissed her without her leave, and by year's end, she had decided she hated all of them. At 15, her mother took her across the Riverlands in a wheelhouse because Daella was afraid of horses, to meet Royce Blackwood, who was tall and courtly and melted her heart with ballads of his own making. And it fell apart when she learned the Blackwoods kept the old gods, and she would have to say her vows before a weirwood. "They don't believe in the gods," she told her mother, horrified. "I'd go to hell." On the first day of the 80th year, the king ran out of patience and said he wanted the girl wed before its end. and that he would line up 100 men naked in front of her if it helped her choose. 100 naked men would frighten her, Alysanne said, unamused. 100 naked ducks would frighten her, the king replied. And then, because he did love her, he told his wife what he actually wanted. Someone gentle, as she is, a kind man, who will never raise his voice or his hand to her, who will tell her she is precious and protect her, against dragons and horses and bees and kittens and whatever else she fears. In the end, it took 3 men rather than 100, and to the astonishment of every woman at court except perhaps her mother, Daella chose the least likely of them. Roderick Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, 36 and 20 years her elder, short and balding with 4 children by a wife already in the ground, who had sat on the small council for 20 years and told the queen plainly that he had loved her little girl for years. "He seems good and wise, like father," the princess said, "and he has 4 children. I'm to be their new mother." Grand Maester Elisar's account of that day records only 2 words: "Gods be good." They were wed before year's end in a small sept on Dragonstone, and he took her home to the Vale and was as good as his word, and for a year and a half her letters spoke of nothing but how kind everyone was to her. Then a different sort of letter came, very short, in her own uncertain hand. "I am with child. Mother, please come. I am frightened." The queen was frightened too. She was on Silverwing within days, and reached the Eyrie 3 moons early, and she stayed for all of it, sitting by the bed and reading her daughter to sleep. "She is such a small girl for such a big belly," she wrote to the king. "I would be frightened too if I were her." To Daella she said the same thing 100 times over. "It will be fine. She will be a girl, wait and see." She was half right. Aemma Arryn came into the world a fortnight early after a long and cruel labor, and it is said her mother smiled when the child was laid against her. The fever came within hours and rose through the night, and by morning Princess Daella was gone at 18 years of age. Lord Roderick begged leave to bury her in the Vale, and the queen refused him. "She was the blood of the dragon. She will be burned, and her ashes interred on Dragonstone beside her sister Daenerys." Alysanne blamed the maester and Lord Arryn, and most of all her husband, who had insisted the girl choose somebody before the year was out. "She was not old enough or strong enough to bear a child," she told him. "We ought never have pushed her into marriage." It is not recorded how the king replied. The daughter who cost them so much would grow up in the Vale and marry a Targaryen prince, and her name is worth remembering. While the queen was wearing herself out over her younger children, her eldest daughter was having the only untroubled marriage in the family. Princess Alyssa had been following Balon about since she could walk, and in the 75th year she married him, 15 years old to his 18, and by every account that has come down to us, the 2 of them were happy in a way nobody else in that castle managed. She meant to be a dragon rider that same year, and sooner than either of her brothers had managed it. Aemon had flown at 17 and Balon at 16, and Alyssa intended to do it at 15, and the dragon keepers spent a good deal of effort talking her out of claiming Velaryon on the grounds that he was old and slow, and she surely wanted a swifter mount. In the end, she took Meleys, a scarlet she-dragon never ridden before, who turned out to be the fastest thing in the sky over Westeros and could outpace both her brothers without trying. She was seldom away from the dragon pit after that. Flying, she liked to say, was the second sweetest thing in the world, and the sweetest could not be named in the company of ladies. In the 77th year she gave her brave prince a son they named Viserys, whom Septon Barth described as a plump and pleasant lad who laughed more than any babe he had ever known. Against all advice, his mother strapped him to her chest and took him up on Meleys when he was 9 days old, and afterward she claimed he had giggled the whole way. 4 years later came a second son, Daemon, and she did exactly the same thing with him inside a fortnight. Their uncle Aemon reached his 26th name day that year, and had proved himself in war and peace both. So the king named him justiciar and master of laws and brought him properly onto the council. Balon drank to his brother's appointment and summed up the difference between them in one line. "I will leave the making of law to you, brother. I would sooner make sons." He was as good as his word, and it killed her. In the 83rd year, Alyssa was with child again, and the next year the labor went badly and went on long. She gave Daelon a third son, and they named him Aegon, and she was still making plans from the bed she could not leave. Viserys and Daemon and Aegon, that's 3. As soon as I am well, let's make another. I want to give you 20 sons, an army of your own. She never got well. Alyssa Targaryen had a warrior's heart in a woman's body, and her strength failed her all the same, and she died within the year, at 4 and 20. The son she had died giving him did not last 6 months longer. Balon the Brave was 27 years old, and he had 2 boys and no wife, and he never took another. There was one daughter left to marry, and she was the one who had never once done as she was told. In the 86th year, the queen announced the betrothal of Viserys, 15 years old, to Theomore Manderly, Lord of White Harbor, a man who had outlived 4 wives already and grown very stout, and who came with the advantage of the North's largest port and the disadvantage of being everything a girl of 15 does not want. Viserys had other plans, and they involved her own brother. Balon was 14 years her elder and newly widowed with 2 young sons, and older lords had married younger girls before, and she could not see a single reason why not. The queen could see several, and set about talking her out of it, and told her at some length what a fine match White Harbor was. "If you like him so much, mother, you should marry him," the princess said, and walked out of the room. She went to Balon next, hoping to be rescued, and court gossip says he did not give her the answer she wanted. How the argument between the queen and her 15-year-old daughter might finally have ended is something we will never know, because Viserys settled it herself. On a summer night, she went out into King's Landing with 2 minor lordlings and 4 young knights, all of them green as spring grass, and somewhere near midnight, what remained of the party decided to race their horses through the streets of the city. It fell to a knight of the King's Guard, in the hour of the wolf, to bring the news back to the Red Keep. She was 16 years old. In the space of 5 years, the queen had buried Daella and Alyssa, and now Viserys. Septa Maegel took leave from her sept to sit with her mother, and it was in those weeks, with 3 daughters gone, that Alysanne finally went to the king about the 4th one, the daughter who was still alive, who had been sent to the faith after a scandal at court, who had run from it and made her own way across the narrow sea to Lys. She asked him to bring the girl home. He refused, and he did it with words the queen never forgave and that were never written down kindly. She pressed him and told him that if he would not bring their daughter back to Westeros, then she would fly to Lys herself and sit with her there, and he told her that the realm had grief enough already. She did not fly to Lys. She also did not forgive him. The maesters of the time called what followed the Great Rift, and a later quarrel nearly as bitter gave it the name it carries now, the First Quarrel. For the whole of the 89th year, the king was on the move without her, flying alone to Casterly Rock and the seats of the west, then south, then to Highgarden, and he did not come home. The old king and the good queen had ruled together for 40 years, and that year the realm watched them govern the same kingdom from opposite ends of it. It was Septa Maegel who ended it, and she did it by telling her father he was being foolish. Rhaenys was to be married the following year, and it ought to be a great occasion. The girl would want all of them there, and the archmaesters called him the Conciliator, so perhaps he might try conciliating something closer to home. A fortnight later, Jaehaerys Targaryen came back to King's Landing. In the 90th year, The king and queen had one of their last good days together, at the wedding of their eldest grandchild. Rhaenys was 16, a dragon rider since she was 13, and she married Corlys Velaryon, Lord of the Tides, who at 37 was already hailed as the greatest seafarer Westeros had ever produced, and had come home from 9 great voyages to marry and make a family. "Only you could have won me away from the sea," he told her. "I came back from the ends of the earth for you." She insisted on arriving for her own wedding on Dragonback, and the dragon she chose was Meleys, the Red Queen, who had once carried her Aunt Alyssa. "We can go back to the ends of the earth together," she promised him. "But I'll get there first, as I'll be flying." "That was a good day," the Queen would say with a sad smile through all the years she had left. She was 54 that year, and she did not have many good days left. 2 years later, a faction driven out of Myr after a bloodbath in that city went looking for somewhere to land and took the eastern half of Tarth while the Evenstar was still working out what was happening. They were pirates more than soldiers by then, and nobody on the council thought it would take much to put them back into the sea. Prince Aemon would lead it, with the Valyrian fleet bringing Lord Boromund and his Stormlanders across to join the Evenstar's levies. And if anything went wrong, he would have Caraxes above them. "He does love to burn," Aemon said. He said goodbye to his wife and his daughter before he flew, and Rhaenys had just learned she was with child, which was the only reason she was not coming. "Into battle? As if I would ever have permitted that. You have your own battle to fight. Lord Corlys will want a son, I am sure, and I would like a grandson." Those were the last words he ever spoke to her. Caraxes outran the fleet by hours and came down on Tarth alone. The Evenstar had fallen back into the spine of mountains that runs down the middle of that island and made a camp in a hidden valley overlooking the Myrish positions, and Aemon met him there, and the two of them made their plans while the dragon ate half a dozen goats. The valley was not as hidden as Lord Cameron believed. Smoke from the dragon's fires drew the eyes of 2 Myrish scouts in the heights above, and one of them recognized the Evenstar walking through the camp at dusk, 100 yards below, deep in conversation with the prince. The men of Myr are feeble soldiers whose weapon of choice is the crossbow, and the scout wounded his behind the rocks and rose and took his aim. Dusk and distance made him less certain than he wanted to be. The bolt missed Lord Cameron entirely and struck the man standing at his side. It went through the prince's throat and out the back of his neck. Aemon Targaryen fell to his knees and reached for it, and his strength was already gone, and he died trying to speak. He was 37 years old, and he had been heir to the Iron Throne for 30 of them. Balon came down on Tarth on Vhagar with Dark Sister in his hand, and the Myrish ships burned. And when the Evenstar and Lord Boromund came down out of the mountains, there was nowhere left for anyone to run. They were cut down in their thousands along the beaches. The small folk lined the streets screaming his name when he brought his brother's body home and hailed him as a hero. And it is said that when he finally saw his mother, he fell into her arms and wept. "I slew 1,000 of them," he told her, "but it will not bring him back." And the queen stroked his hair and said that she knew. The roads went on creeping outward across the realm, and new bridges spanned old streams, and the harvests came in golden, and the king took no visible pleasure in any of it. "It is always winter now," he told Septon Barth one night, having drunk too much of the honeyed wine he needed to sleep since his son died. The king named Balon Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne, and it was a popular decree, because the small folk loved Balon the Brave, and the lords of the realm saw him as his brother's obvious successor. It was also the decision that would bring the whole thing down. Prince Aemon had left a child. Rhaenys was 18 years old, clever and capable, married to the richest lord in the realm, and carrying a baby when her father died. By giving Dragonstone to Balon, the king passed over his son's daughter and, possibly, his son's grandson as well. He did not do it lightly, and he did not do it alone. He took it to the small council, and to Septon Barth, and to Grand Maester Elessar, and every one of them agreed with him, and the precedent was on their side. Aegon the Conqueror had ruled, rather than his elder sister Visenya. Jaehaerys himself had followed Maegor on the throne when strict order of birth would have given it to his sister Rhaena. Balon was a seasoned knight of 35, with 2 healthy sons already, and Rhaenys was 18 with a child in her belly who might not even be a boy. Rhaenys was the first to object. "You would rob my son of his birthright," she told her grandfather, with a hand on her swollen belly. Corlys Velaryon was so angry that he gave up his admiralty and his seat on the council and took his wife home to Driftmark. Lady Jocelyn was angry, and so was her brother Boromund, Lord of Storm's End. And then the Queen spoke, and what she said has outlived everyone in the room. "A ruler needs a good head and a true heart," she told her husband, "and what a man keeps below his belt is not essential to either one. And if His Grace truly believed that women lacked the wit to rule, then plainly he had no further need of her." Then Alicent Targaryen walked out of the Red Keep, climbed onto Silverwing, and flew to Dragonstone. They remained apart for 2 years, and the histories call it the Second Quarrel. Septa Maegel brought them back together again in the 94th year, as she had the first time, and they never once agreed about the succession. The Queen went to her grave insisting that her granddaughter and her granddaughter's children had been cheated. The child in the belly, the one they had argued over, turned out to be a girl, and Rhaenys named her Laena. A brother followed the year after, and they named him Laenor. Balon was firmly established as heir by then, and House Velaryon and House Baratheon went on quietly believing that the boy from the elder line had the better claim, and some of them said the same of his sister, and a few said it of their mother. There was one more thing that happened in the 93rd year, and it closes a circle. Balon's eldest son Viserys, 16 years old, walked into the dragon pit and claimed Balerion. The Black Dread had finally stopped growing. He was sluggish and heavy and hard to wake, and he struggled to get airborne at all. And the young prince flew him 3 times around the city and brought him down again. He had meant to fly to Dragonstone, he told his father afterward, but he did not think the old dragon had the strength in him. Less than a year later, Balerion was gone, and Septon Barth wrote the only epitaph that mattered. The last living creature in all the world who saw Valyria in its glory. Alicent Targaryen had loved music and dancing and reading, and she had loved her subjects and her women's courts, and more than any of it, she had loved to fly. Silverwing had carried her to Old Town and to the Wall and to 1,000 places between, and she had seen more of the 7 kingdoms than any queen before or since. She lost all of it in the last 10 years of her life. "My uncle Maegor was cruel," she was heard to say, "but age is crueler." She grew thin and frail after Aemon died. In the 95th year, she slipped on the Serpentine steps and broke her hip, and walked with a cane from then on. And her hearing began to fail, so music went first, and then the council chamber. Silverwing carried her into the sky for the last time in the 93rd year, and when she climbed painfully down from her dragon's back, she wept. Of the 13 children she bore, 3 outlived her. Aegon and Gaemon and Valerion had died as babes. The Shivers had taken Daenerys at 6. A crossbow had taken Aemon. Alyssa and Daella had died in childbed, and Visera in the street. Septa Maegel, who had mended both of her parents' quarrels, died in the 96th year with her arms and legs turned to stone by grayscale, because she had spent her last years nursing the people nobody else would touch. "No mother should ever have to burn her child," the Queen had said years earlier at a pyre, and she said it again more than once. Sarah was still alive somewhere in Volantis by then, wealthy and infamous, and she was dead to the king, and the letters her mother sent her in secret were never answered. Fagon wrote from the citadel as a son ought to write, dutiful and cold, and it had been years since Alysanne had seen his face. Which left Gale, the winter child, born in the 80th year when the queen was 44 and thought to be well past bearing. She was frail and sweet and slow, and she stayed with her mother long after the others had grown and gone, and she was the only real companion Alysanne had left. In the 99th year, she vanished from court, and shortly afterward, it was announced that she had died of a summer fever. That was not what happened, and only after both her parents were in the ground did the truth come out. That a traveling singer had promised her a great deal and left, that the child she carried was born dead, and that she did not survive the grief of it. Her mother went to her own grave believing it was a fever. Only Balon was left near her at the end, and he came when he could, and he always got a smile out of her. "You will be a great king," she told him the last time they were together, "even greater than your father." She did not know. How could she know? After Gale, the Red Keep became unbearable to her. The court was full of strangers whose names she could not hold on to, and she could no longer do the work that had been the whole point of her. So she went back to Dragonstone, where she and Jaehaerys had spent the happiest years of their lives. He came when he could. "How is it that I am the old king now?" he asked her once, "but you are still the good queen?" Alysanne laughed at him. "I am old as well, but I am still younger than you." She died on Dragonstone on the first day of the 7th moon in the 100th year after the conquest, a full century after her grandfather came ashore, at 64 years of age. Septon Barth had died 2 years before her, peacefully in his sleep, a fortnight after the great tourney that celebrated the 50th year of the reign, a tourney where more dragons were seen in one place than at any time since the doom of Valyria. He had been Hand of the King for 41 years. His replacement lasted 1, because the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard turned out to be a better lance than a statesman, and as one maester observed, some problems cannot be solved by hitting them with a stick. So in the 99th year, the king gave the office to his son. Balon was Prince of Dragonstone and Hand of the King both, and he was good at it, and lords and commons agreed that the realm would be well ruled when he came to the throne. In the 101st year, Balon complained of a stitch in his side while hunting in the Kingswood. The pain got worse when he reached the city. His belly swelled and hardened until he could not leave his bed, and the new Grand Maester brought the fever down a little and gave him milk of the poppy for the rest. And none of it changed anything. On the 5th day of his illness, Balon Targaryen died in the Tower of the Hand, with his father sitting beside him, holding his hand. He was 44. All 7 kingdoms wept for brave Balon, and when the old king lit his son's pyre, he did not even have his wife beside him. He had never been so alone in his life, and he had a decision in front of him that he had already got wrong once. Both his heirs were dead and burned, and there was no shortage of people who might follow. Balon had left 2 living sons, Viserys and Daemon. Rhaenys was still alive, with a daughter, Laena, and a son, Laenor. And Laenor was male and descended from the elder brother, while Balon's boys came from the younger. And the king still had a son of his own, Fagon, near 40 years old, an archmaester at the citadel with the ring and rod and mask of yellow gold, whose existence most of Westeros had forgotten. History remembers him as Fagon the Dragonless. And it was Fagon that the old king sent for,
What passed between them is still disputed. Some say the throne was offered and refused, others that he only wanted counsel. But the situation outside that room was plain enough. Corlys Velaryon was massing ships and men on Driftmark to defend his son's rights, and Daemon Targaryen, 20 years old and quarrelsome, had gathered sworn swords of his own for his brother. Whichever name the king spoke, somebody was going to fight about it.
So he did not speak a name. He announced a great council instead, invited every lord great and small in Westeros, along with maesters from the Citadel and septons to speak for the faith, and declared that he would abide by whatever they decided. They met at Harrenhal, because it was the only castle in the realm with hall enough. It was the same Harrenhal his own sister had died in 28 years earlier, in a tower they still call the Widow's Tower. 1,000 lords came, from the Dornish marches to the shadow of the wall. 14 claims were laid before them and argued over for 13 days, and 9 of the lesser ones were discarded, including a hedge knight who put himself forward as a natural son of the king and was seized and imprisoned once the king exposed him as a liar. In the end, it came down to 2 boys and a single question. Viserys claimed through his father, and Laenor claimed through his mother, and the lords assembled decided that the male line came first. Corlys Velaryon, who had sailed to the ends of the earth and back and spent his fortune and his fleet on this, lost. The king had not attended. When word of the verdict reached him, he thanked them and let it stand. He had 2 years left. His new hand was Sir Otto Hightower, who brought his family to court, and as the old king's strength and wits gave out, it was Sir Otto's 15-year-old daughter who sat with him, fetching his meals and helping him dress and reading to him. He would sometimes mistake her for one of his own daughters and call her by their names, and near the end he became certain she was Sarah, come back to him at last from across the narrow sea. In the 103rd year after the conquest, Jaehaerys the Conciliator died in his bed, while Lady Alicent Hightower was reading to him from Septon Barth's Unnatural History. He was 69 years old, and had worn the crown for 55 of them, longer than any Targaryen ever would again. They burned him in the dragon pit, and laid his ashes beside Alysanne's on Dragonstone. And even in Dorne, where his writ had never reached, men wept, and women tore their garments. His grandson Viserys took the Iron Throne at 26, married to Aemma Arryn, the daughter Daella had died to give the world, and between them they had one living child, a girl of 6 named Rhaenyra. Jaehaerys Targaryen built roads and wrote laws and kept the peace for 55 years, and the only thing he could not do was decide who came after him. So he let 1,000 lords decide it for him. They ruled that a man came before a woman. 28 years later, that ruling came due, and the bill was settled in Dragonfire. Next time, on Fire and Blood, the reign men called the apex of Targaryen power, a king who wanted only for everyone to get along, a daughter he named his heir, and the brother who never forgave him for it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.